in child protective services, and they won't give them back to their loving families because they're making money.
This is a legal system that you're going into. And if you don't know the rules, you will be chewed up and spit out.
If I could say anything to a mother who just got their children detained, you're in a crisis. Yeah. Life feels like it's over. The most important thing is regaining custody of your children.
The child welfare system at its core is designed to protect children who need protection. Okay, and that's key, is who need protection.
So social workers, out of fear, will remove more children rather than only remove those children that truly need to be removed.
It's okay. It's okay.
This isn't someone stole your car. Someone broke into your house. This is someone took your child, your flesh and blood.
It doesn't say on this order that it was not proven. It says untrue. True. I immediately knew that, okay, well, this ain't over.
Were there signs there? Were there no signs? Did I miss them? Did I catch them? At this point, I honestly don't know.
Families only get a finite amount of time to reunify.
I came into this field to help families, not destroy them.
The difference between the criminal system and the child welfare system is substantial. You have more rights as a criminal than you do as a parent.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sabrina, and I'm your host for today. This is Fight CPS with Sabrina. My guest for today is Amanda. I couldn't help but reach out to you. I saw your a little bit of what you're going through on Facebook with the foster mom not wanting to give back your child. I'm not sure the whole story. So do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what's happening, what's going on with this whole CPS deal?
Well, I'm Amanda. I have 7 children currently in the system. 4 are with the foster mom, caregiver, I like to say, and the other 3 are with another family member. This all started out back in 2019. One of my older sons was accused of sexual abuse. And, you know, he said he didn't do anything, and it was his word against them. No evidence. There was nothing proven. But we had to basically agree to it. Like, yeah, he did it, because they would have done even worse. But because of his age, they just put us in an intact service. It's either intact or impact, one of them. Intact service, and you know, we were dealing with them for 2 years. Everything was going smoothly. My son was in counseling up until March of 21. My second son, he's a type 1 diabetic. He had gotten ill. I couldn't control his blood sugars. You know, he was taken to the hospital from the school because he left that morning for school. Didn't even tell me he was sick or wasn't feeling well, because we have a routine. He goes to school, has his blood sugars checked. He was high, of course. They called me to come pick him up. I'm like, okay, fine. I have to get 2 babies ready, and then I'll be on my way. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't take that long, or it doesn't take just like a minute or 2 to get 2 babies ready. And it's January or February. Like, I got to turn the van on. I got to start it. I got to get 2 babies ready. Well, from that point, like, I met him at the hospital because I didn't know where he was. The school didn't inform me nothing. Well, I get to the hospital because my older son was in counseling. and everything had to be supervised. You know, he's not allowed to be left with children, this and that, but it was COVID time. I couldn't take the littles into the hospital. I let them sit in the car so I could run into the emergency room and see what's going on with my other son. And I explained to the nurses, I gotta go. I can't stay in here. Please tell me what's going on, what's going to happen, this and that. Well, they wanted to do the COVID test. I refused. So they said they were going to call DCFS and they're going to get the COVID test done regardless. So they said I refused treatment for my son. And that was a lie. I just refused the COVID test.
Yeah, and that's your right. You know, I've known a lot of people, like over 5 of my friends passed away after getting the COVID vaccine. You know, so I mean, that's your right. And so your kid was taken there because of diabetes, and they're trying to force you with the vaccine.
Well, not the vaccine, just the test in general.
The test, okay.
So, with that being said, I'm like, okay, well then do what you have to do then. I'll handle this later. You know, I called the hospital, made a formal complaint against the hospital, the doctor, all that stuff. So a month goes by. I get a call, like literally 8:30, almost 9 o'clock at night, from the supervisor of DCFS on a 3-way call with the caseworker. And she's like, this ain't working out. You need to give the kids to their father. And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, there's just supervisors above me, the head of DCFS, this and that. I'm like, this is not fair. I'm like, everything's been going smoothly. Everything's been just fine, you know. And so at that point, that same night, I took all my kids to Indiana. 2 of them were staying with my mom at the time because it was almost a weekend. Kids were out of school too anyways. And they called, or DCFS called the father and said, hey, you gotta come get these kids. He was in Texas working. And that's Brett. Oh, yeah, well, he's gonna be on here. But he left Texas, he came down, and that same weekend, I'm like, no, I ain't doing this. I don't have to. That's my right. They can't force me to give my kids up to just anybody.
Yeah.
So I then took my kids to Iowa, to my father's house. They can't do nothing. I went back to the house to go collect my belongings and just leave. And they called me like, what did you do? This is going to be impossible to fix. You just created a huge mess, blah, blah, blah. So the next day, they're at my door saying, we're here to take your kids. I'm like, for what? They're not here no more. They're like, well, you got to tell us where they're at. I'm like, no, I don't. And they're like, well, we'll put out a child, what is it called? Like a state to statewide, like Amber Alert type of thing.
Amber Alert. Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay. I'm still not giving you the address. I'm like, this is just an investigation. It's not a case. I don't have to give you my kids.
And what grounds were they trying to remove the kids on? What were they saying? Like, what's the emergency here?
They used the medical neglect. I'm like, it doesn't make sense because you wait a month later to sit there and say it's neglect now because they're pissed off because they didn't get their way in a way, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So because I didn't tell them where the kids were, I was on the phone actually when they were at the house with a lawyer. And they're like, well, if they're there to get the kids, then more than likely they have paperwork from state's attorney or this and that. Then you have to get the kids to them. I'm like, okay. I'm like, do I have to tell them where they're at? He's like, no, but just tell them they can come back when you're back at the house with the kids. So that's what I did. They came the next day and got the kids. So we've been dealing with that. We've been going to court for a year and a half now, fighting to get the kids. when it came down to everything being argued in court, they pretty much sided with DCFS.
They always do.
Yeah, even though case law's been presented and everything's proven, the judge himself even said, I don't know my jurisdiction. This is like his second child case. And so, I mean, the lawyers, they put up a good fight. They presented case laws, they did this, they did that. Like, they're amazing. But this county, you just won't win in it.
Were these private attorneys that you had, or are they public defenders?
Mine is a private attorney.
Okay.
Their father's is a public defender.
Okay. Well, that's great. They have a private attorney. That makes a world of a difference.
Yeah, I went an hour away. I didn't want an attorney that's in that town. It's a small town where everyone's friends. Like, everyone knows everyone. I'm like, no, I'll pay for the traveling fee. I don't want no one associated with this county.
Smart. Yeah. So they took all 7 children away because of medical neglect, supposedly on one of the child?
Medical neglect and inadequate supervision.
So then they take all the kids and then you go to court. Did they give you services to do?
Yeah, we completed the services pretty much. The only thing ongoing right now is like a couples counseling. We had to do like a psychosexual education service, you know, counseling. I already had a counselor for myself, but they're pretty offensive because I won't sign releases for them to be all up in my business.
Yeah.
And and then we had to do a parenting class, and then now we're just doing the couples co-parent type of counseling.
So what are they telling you in court? Like, as of right now, where do you guys stand?
So our kids were set to come home next month, actually. But we kind of figured something was going to happen the way that the 4 younger kids' caregiver, which is a relative of mine, has been acting. Because I get texts out of nowhere like, do you really love your kids, or do you just want them back because they're your property?
Oh my goodness.
And because the thing is my 4-year-old, she's my pride and joy. I may not see it that I show more favoritism, but I do point it out a lot, you know, but I'm just very attached to her. And the older girls point that out to the caregiver and their counselor, and they make it seem like I'm the bad parent and I don't show them enough attention. And like, I have 7 kids, like
That's
literally
simple.
back to back. The littles need more attention than big kids.
Yeah.
And so with her saying all that stuff, I start getting weekend visits, overnights, all that stuff. Up until recently, it was all stopped because an allegation came out of more sexual abuse. I'm like, but how? Like, it's not nothing against us parents or anything. It's children is what they're referring to with my 4-year-old, and well, he's now 8. And they're using that as inadequate supervision. And, you know, I automatically went into defense mode. I'm like,
yeah,
we stay busy all weekend to where we're not even at the house. How can something like this happen? Where can this happen? And I just don't see it happening. And the caseworker, the new caseworker, I believe it's conflict of interest, because when I first moved in Illinois, I had her also for an investigation for medical neglect because I took my son to the hospital. I just moved to Illinois at that time when she first came out, and I haven't switched doctors yet. My son got sick and I took him to the hospital. The the ER doctor at the time was like, oh, well, that's why you need a doctor out here. And it's 12:30 at night. I'm like, so you mean to tell me a doctor's going to open up his office at 12:30 at night just to see my child? No, that's what a hospital's for.
Exactly.
Well, that's why he called DCFS on me. But that was unfounded. But that same investigator, she was a real, and so we have her now, and she's doing the exact same thing. And,
I was just asking if you were drug tested.
No, we were never drug tested. Nothing like that. I mean, we don't do drugs anyways, or we don't drink, like nothing like that. I mean, their dad works every single day. He travels everywhere to do his job. I was a stay-at-home mom. Like we do everything together as family. We're very family oriented. I'm a strict mom. Yes, I am. Grant you that. I'm not a perfect mom, but I think this whole case is just really uncalled for, and it's just for them to lash out and retaliate. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, yeah, you seen a single mom with 7 kids, you're looking at dollar signs. And, these caseworkers, they hate us.
I was going to say, it sounds like they're just trying to come up with whatever excuses that they can, because they make a lot of money per child they adopt out. And 7 of them is a whole lot of money for them.
I tell them all the time. And then I tell them, I'm like, yeah, the more kids you put in counseling, the more money you guys getting paid.
Exactly.
They're like, no, we don't get paid. I'm like, I don't know who you think you're fooling. I'm like, we're not dumb.
Yeah, they do. And, you were saying you have your own counselor, and normally they won't even if you were to sign the release forms, that's not even good enough for them. They mandate that you go to their own counselors, because that way they can have them say whatever they want, quite frankly.
Well, see, this is how dumb they are, because they don't mandate, they recommend.
Oh, yeah.
So when you point that out to them and you don't do the services when they recommend, that's what they hold against you too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they did too in the beginning, because they recommended services for my 4th child, my daughter, and I didn't do it. And I'm like, it was a recommendation.
They should really word it differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a recommendation. It's really like they're telling you to do it, which is really, your life isn't hard enough already as it is, and now you're going to throw on all these services, that are recommended, right?
Yeah, and then I tell them, I'm like, with all these services you want to give us, I'm like, how do you expect us to hold a job? Because then we have to call off and do the service. We have to drop what we're doing for you. I'm like, but you can't accommodate to us.
Yeah. How are your visits like? Do you have visits?
Our visits are back to only 2 hours, 1 day a week, and we have a supervisor that's there watching us every given second. So our visits are pretty awkward, because I make smart remarks. I'm like, oh, we can't do that because we're being watched, or we do fight back. And I think that's a lot of their retaliation, because we do know our rights. We do know the laws and all that stuff. But because of all that stuff, it gets all reported back. And I want to say, my gut feeling is that the caregiver for the 4 little ones, the 2 older girls there, they report back and tell her everything, along with their counselor, every given second that happens at the visit. It's like they're almost looking for something to use against us.
Wow.
And I say that my kids are literally brainwashed.
Yeah, I believe it. And so the kids are with 2 different caregivers, but do they give the kids visits with each other?
We do the visits all together.
Okay.
Because we were only getting 1 day out of the week, and it's literally the weekend, because we work every single day now, both of us. And because they're in 2 separate areas, they're 2 hours apart. So we have to do it that way.
Okay. And what's the age range?
14, 12, 10, 9, 8, 4, 2.
Wow. That's you really have your hands full there, don't you?
Yeah. And them being in the care for a year and a half, we can't stress enough how much we've missed out on the baby's life. He was a year old. And when they come to the visits, my 4-year-old, she'll call me by the caregiver's name. And yeah, it does bother me.
I bet.
And I have to correct her all the time.
Oh, poor thing. That's got to be really difficult. And
it's real traumatizing. I tell these caseworkers all the time, I'm like, you're saying that I traumatize my kids when you guys are the ones doing the most trauma.
Right.
And they're like, no, that's not what we're doing. And they need help and they need to go to the counseling. I'm like, for what? I'm like, you put them with a counselor. I'm like, my opinion of this counselor, she had trauma as a child and she just needs a hug. And she's taking that out, trying to fix her issues through my kids. And they're like, no, she's not. I'm like, yep, that's exactly what's happening, is because she was traumatized as a child. And everything that we do is wrong.
Wow. And so what does your private attorney say? You said the kids were supposed to be coming back next month. Is that not the case anymore?
No, there's two new allegations. The first one actually stopped the visits from overnights and stuff. And then another one came out that was said by my older daughter. And the caseworker's like, I assure you, it wasn't the caregiver that did it. I'm like, and I can bet you my last dollar in my bank account that the caregiver encouraged my daughter to say something to her counselor, and the counselor called in. Because if this was something that happened 3 years ago, why wasn't this said when she was going through this counseling, when she was interviewed by the forensics, and all of a sudden this is like this now? It's being said. Yeah. And so, the visits are only 2 hours now. And the kids were set on paper to come home in July, but the caseworker said that they'll be home right when school ends in June, but not anymore.
Have you had a chance to talk to your girls, the older ones, and tell them like that, by saying these things to the caregiver or to the counselor, it's going to affect them coming home?
Oh, yeah. We've got in trouble for that. We're not allowed to talk to our kids about anything. If it's not in a therapeutic session, we are not allowed to talk to the kids. If we want to talk to them, girls, we have to set an appointment in a therapeutic session.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, yes. It's very ridiculous that we can't even talk to our kids. But they express how they want us to understand their feelings, and they want us to talk to our kids. I'm like, how do you want us to do that when
we're not allowed
talking to the kids? I'm like, you guys make no sense.
Nope. It's so crazy.
I can talk to the other kids though.
Promises. You can't make any kind of promises or anything like that. And like to dock your visits over this is just so like horrifying. I can't even believe this. Like
with my 4-year-old, when she asked, Mom, when are we coming home? I'm like, soon, baby, soon. They called me the next day. Don't be telling her that, because soon to a 4-year-old, it could be tomorrow. It could be an hour. It could be. I'm like, well, what do you want me to tell her when? Okay, I'm like, I'll keep it straightforward with her. I'm like, well, the caseworker said you can't come home until she's ready to let you come home. They're like, no, you just don't say that to her either. You got to say this. You got to say it that way. I'm like, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it because you guys want me to lie to my child.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the CPS workers, like, they have a way of, like, I guess sort of brainwashing the kids. And, like, with my case, the social worker would literally take my daughter for ice cream.
Yes.
And, like, basically reward her for saying things that would help her in her case. Yes. And if my daughter didn't tell her anything, then she would turn around and not get her ice cream. Like, things like that, like, to make the kids say what they want to say.
They were doing that with the older girls too. And until I their dad and we complained. I'm like, that's coaching, that's leading, that's putting things in their head, that's like everything, because they were doing that to the older girls. And I called the caseworker out on it. And I'm like, why don't you do that with the boys? I'm like, because the boys aren't weak-minded and you targeted the girls. I'm like, you don't take the boys out for ice cream. You don't do any of that stuff. And then after we confronted her on it, she stopped. And we told the girls, they're not your friends. I'm like, stop believing them. You know, they will buy you anything you want and do anything that you want. They'll come to your class events or they'll do this and that just to get information out of you.
Right.
And that's what they were doing. And I told them, stop. They are not your friends.
Yeah. And it's so hard to be able to like get that message to them when you're not allowed to talk to them about anything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh. So they told you now that you're not going to get them back, you know, next month. So did they give you any kind of a time frame?
Nope. We have to get through the investigation part first of these 2 new allegations.
Oh my goodness. Oh boy. And how are they going to go about doing that?
So this caseworker told her dad that, oh, this could take up to 6 months. I'm like, it could take 60 days unless she asks for an extension, which more than likely she will, just to keep it going. Yeah. And she made the comment to their dad about, oh, she'd love to give the kids back, but this is just too much. And I think what she was hinting at was like termination. And I called, like, there's the 2 different caseworkers. You have the investigation caseworker, and then I have the actual caseworker for the foster side. They claim, like, how they section it out, I guess. And I called the caseworker, our caseworker, after the kids got taken. And I'm like, can you assure me that they're not going for termination? She's like, oh, no, our goal is to get them home. But throughout this whole course,
they lied.
Yeah, she's always said that, oh, well, there's another option. You can give guardianship to the caregiver of the 2 girls, just the 2 girls. And, you know, at first, like, we were starting to get, I don't want to say fed up. We were just lost of options, like defeated. And we were considering it, but then we talked to a few more people, and they're like, don't do it, because if you do it through DCFS, that's for permanent guardianship until the kids are 18, and then the caregiver can fight you. They don't have to give your kid back. I'm like, okay, well, that option is off the table now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the whole time throughout this whole course, I was going to sign guardianship to my oldest son to my sister. And I had no problem doing that. I still have no problem doing that because my sister is not going to do that to me.
Yeah.
She was just doing this to help me and get him out of the system and to move forward with the case, with the kids to come home sooner. But the caseworker's like, oh, you're just trying to beat the system. I'm like, if I wanted to beat the system, I would have played you guys already.
Yeah.
I'm like, I could have easily done that when I had intact services.
Right. So the kids are with 2 separate caregivers, right? One is the foster mom, and the other one is your sister, or?
No, the other one, so the caregiver with the 4 little ones, she's a cousin of mine.
Okay.
And then the 3 boys is my sister's dad.
Okay. And how's your relationship with them?
Well, we were communicating with the 4 little ones. Her and we communicated well up until recently when she started getting ballsy through text and saying all kinds of stuff. And I'm blocked. She even blocked us from our kids. She blocked us on all social medias of our kids. She did all that stuff. And I'm like, you can't do that. But I guess the caseworker gave her permission because she bought the girls their phones and she pays the bills. I'm like, oh, we're going to play that game. I'm like, well, then I don't want her texting my boyfriend, which is the kid's dad. Mm-hmm. I'm like, all communication can go through you, meaning the caseworker, because I pay these phone bills. They're in my name, so she doesn't need to be texting. I'm like, if she wants to play the game, we'll play the game too. As far as my sister's dad, we don't really communicate unless he's saying, hey, your son needs medicine. Can you get it refilled? Pick it up, blah, blah, blah. That's like the only communication that we have. I mean, he doesn't talk much regardless, even prior to all this.
But he's not trying to keep the kids from you.
Oh, no.
That's good. You know, a lot of the times too, the CPS workers, they don't want to take any chances. And if you are like close with your relatives who are taking care of the kids, they'll come in between you and they'll start all kinds of crap and they'll threaten them and, you know, trying to put a wedge between you guys.
Oh, I don't care. Like, me and my cousin's relationship is gone. I mean, we weren't close to begin with. It's just, she just moved out to Illinois from Vegas. And I think she was there for maybe 2 months. And then, boom, all this happened. And I don't have many relatives in Illinois that aren't felons. And so I was desperate. I'm like, hey, can you please take my kids? I just don't want them with a stranger.
Yeah.
And she did. You know, I amended her for, you know, all the stuff that she did do for my kids. And she was taking good care of them. I mean, she does. But I feel like they're literally brainwashed with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And she's not doing it for free. They give her money to do it.
Oh, yeah, she gets money. But I feel like they're not giving them enough to what they're.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the amount is where you are, but my mom was getting like $1,200-$1,300 per child.
One?
Yeah.
No, see, she gets $1,200 for 4, and he gets $800 for 3. I'm like, no.
Yeah, that's not enough. You're right.
No, it's not. And I'm like, DCFS is also supposed to be providing the transportation. And they're not even doing that. They're not reimbursing nothing like they said they are. They're supposed to. They don't do anything. They do the bare minimum. And we call them out on that because we know what they're supposed to be doing. And I told the caseworker, I'm like, that's fine. Then I'll milk you guys for every dime that you want to give out. So if the kids need beds or if the kids need clothes and you're offering, I'm taking it.
Might as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they're even supposed to help like with people who don't have any housing at all. They're supposed to like give housing and like all kinds of things that they don't do.
No, like they said, once the kids come home, there's a program that allows the family $2,000 and you can use it for whatever. But that's all they give.
Oh, wow. Okay. I haven't heard of that one.
That's Illinois for you.
All right. Well, so your husband gets visits too? Do you guys all do it all together?
Yeah, we're together. So we do everything together.
That's good. They're not trying to stop him or anything.
Mm-mm.
That's good. I hear a lot that they try to like separate couples. Like a lot.
No, at the time we were separated for a few months. Well, yeah, a few months. But when it came down to the kids in this case, we worked together and we ended up getting back together. And
cool.
I think they dislike him more because he will blow their phones up until they answer. He will text and text and text.
That's great.
And like he puts everything a lot in the text, so then he has proof for everything.
Yes, that's important.
You know, yeah, the caseworker's like, we can't just stop what we're doing to answer your phone calls. I'm like, oh well, you're the caseworker, you have to.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I could tell you that they really dislike us.
Yeah. You know what though? You got to do what you got to do, and if that means blowing them up, then you know it's their jobs. I don't know how you can become a social worker. Like that's a horrible job, but you know.
Yeah, and
I mean, these are your kids. Now, like, of course, you're gonna do everything you can. You know,
That's what I told them. I'm like, I'm gonna fight for my kids. You know, with my older son now being where he's at, he's been getting in a lot of trouble, a lot of fighting, a lot of, you know, he has court next month for trespassing on the mall because he's kicked out of the mall, stealing, He'd been to jail twice already. And I'm like, well, that's that good old Chicago living. You guys won't do nothing about it. And they're like, well, hey, that's where you picked. And I'm like, yeah, I picked with a family member. But when all this trouble started, we asked you to do something because my son keeps getting in trouble. And now they want to send him to a juvenile center.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I told the caseworker, you do that and there's going to be a war.
I mean, he's obviously acting out because of all this, right?
That's exactly what it is. He expressed to his counselor that, you know, he takes his anger out because he wants to be home. He misses me. He's a mama's boy.
Yeah.
You know, he's my firstborn. And they're like, well, he still needs to be held accountable for his actions. I'm like, well, if he feels better punching somebody in the face, then you guys told me in parenting classes, I got to support my child. They're like, well, no, that's not the way to go about it. I'm like, I'm just doing what you guys taught me in parenting class.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some sarcasm in there, obviously.
Yeah, I get it.
But, and they're like, no, that's not what we want you to do. I'm like, it is what it is. He's angry. I'm like, why not give him some anger management? They're like, well, he's working with that with his counselor, but he's not being successful. Maybe he needs some medication. And they know I'm against it. They
do that on purpose because they get a bunch more funding once that happens.
Well, they also got all my kids their shots. I don't vaccinate. I haven't vaccinated in 4 years. I stopped when my daughter was 6 months old, my 4-year-old.
Yeah.
After learning about vaccines and everything, I stopped.
Yeah.
Well, they went and vaccinated every single child.
That's really annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right before I had my daughter, I met a lady and she told me that right after she got her son vaccinated is when he started developing signs and symptoms of Down syndrome. And she told me, like, you know, when you have your daughter, just don't do them all at once. Do them really, really slow. And that's what I did. And they tried to like come after me for it and like tell me that I had to, but no, you don't have to. You know, they went to school, like there's paperwork that you can sign saying that you don't want to have your child vaccinated, you know?
Yeah, that was argued in court. The guardian ad litem's like, well, how does your kids go to school? It's illegal not to have vaccines when going to school. I'm like, I signed a paper.
Yep.
And they said, well, if that's religion, then we need to contact your ministry. I'm like, actually, a religion is anything that you believe in. And I'm like, I couldn't provide you with a ministry because it's not through a ministry. I believe in not vaccinating. That's my personal belief. That's considered a religion. And they're like, well, it's illegal. So they overruled me and my kids. So once they get caught up on their regular immunizations, they want to move forward to the COVID shot.
That should be like 100% your decision. You know, that is so frustrating.
Yep.
Oh, wow. It makes my blood boil, really.
That's how I felt.
Yeah, like that is so like wrong, you know? And so how are the kids like in a whole, like how are they all doing? Are they like starting, I mean, I know your son's acting out, but the rest of them, how are they all doing with everything?
So the other two boys that are with my oldest son, they're used to being at that house because every time there's no school and every weekend, they're always there. So it's not really a big change for them there. The two older girls, they don't want to come home at all.
They don't.
And that's because they got a cell phone. They have social media. They're allowed to go to their friend's house, which I never stopped them from going to their friend's house at home. I'm like, well, give me just the parents' information. We'll talk to the parents, and then you can go to your friend's house.
Sure, that's normal.
And, you know, they never provided information, so they weren't ever allowed to go anywhere without me knowing. We don't believe really in electronics for children.
Yeah.
We'd rather see you outside playing, riding a bike, walk to your friend's house, go to the park. So because the two girls are happy that they have the electronics, they get to go on the game systems, and do all this. They have all this freedom and fun and everything. They don't want to come home, period. The oldest daughter flat out told her dad she don't want to come home.
Wow. And do they know that that's affecting the other kids from coming home?
I kind of feel like this is tearing all the kids apart. Like they're hating each other because the 3 boys and 2 babies, they want to come home.
Yeah.
And they say things to these girls, and then it comes back on us because, I mean, at the time we don't hear it. And the caseworker and the counselor is like, why don't you say anything and correct them or discipline them for saying something to the girls? I'm like, we didn't hear it. We don't know what was said. But it's kind of tearing them apart as siblings.
Yeah.
And it's really affecting them. Like, especially the girls, like they're completely brainwashed. They don't want to come home for nothing.
Yeah.
They first said it's,
yeah.
we want to stay here because of their friends, or we want to stay here until school ends. And then they changed it. Oh no, we want to stay until after our birthday. Because they didn't like when I said, I'm like, they're not your friends. They're your acquaintance. You are only there temporary.
Yeah.
Well, the caseworker jumped down my throat about that. I'm like, what do you want me to tell them? I'm like, it's the truth.
Yeah. Have you explained to your attorney that they're using manipulation and rewarding them and, you know, things to make them not want to come home?
I have. I kind of feel like he focuses on just the stuff on paper at the time of courts and everything, and he doesn't bring up like the little things.
Right.
Like I was considering hiring another lawyer for like backup.
Yeah.
But
because I mean that's kind of a big deal. Like in your court case, if you know they're totally being manipulated and being rewarded and gifted, of course they're not going to want to come home. You know, they have different rules there that you know that you don't have, or vice versa, and you know that's going to affect what they say, and what they say is affecting your court case. You know, now it's going to be even longer that you get your kids back because of what they had said. You know, so maybe if your attorney, you know, looks into that a little bit, maybe they can use that in court to try to explain why the girls are saying what they're saying.
yeah, I mean, we expressed it. I told her dad, I said, can you call your attorney and let him know what's going on? I already informed mine of the new allegations. But part of them allegations to why the kids it's prolonging even longer is because when we did a meeting, when it all came out and they had to talk to you about the new allegations and they told me what happened, they didn't get the reaction that they wanted. They wanted me to automatically say that I believe this happened. I'm like, I can't. When you're accusing another child of mine with another child as the victim, I feel like you want me to choose sides.
Yeah.
I'd rather stay open-minded until all the facts are gathered and there's proof. And they said, well, what proof do you want? I'm like, well, you're not going to get any proof. I'm like, it's going to be a he said, she said.
Right.
Because through the hospital, everything came back negative.
That's good.
And they're like, well, we believe it happened because the 4-year-old said this and this and that, and it's very detailed. I'm like, do you guys also realize the caregiver asked her 4 times and then recorded it? And then in the recording, the caregiver asked, what did your brother so-and-so do to you? I'm like, that's leading.
Yes, it is.
And they're like, well, no, she was just in shock when she asked all this and she wanted to be sure. I'm like, well, legally, a caregiver cannot ask a foster child questions like that. That's what the forensic is for.
Yeah.
Well, they're like, well, we don't see a problem with it.
Of course
like,
not,
there's-
because it's helping them. Of course they don't see a problem with it. Gosh.
And then we even brought up about having a camera in the little's bedroom, you know, for a 2-year-old. I'm like, well, that's kind of illegal too, because if they get undressed in there, that's like almost having child pornography on your phone.
That is
Who
true.
knows if you save it? And then, so with all that being said, with the new allegations, they wanted me to rearrange my house. Like, mind you, I already have 5 bedrooms, to where the girls are not allowed upstairs. I'm like, I have 1 bedroom downstairs and that's mine. And I'm not going to give it to a child because there's a door that leads outside. And they're like, well, what about the playroom? I'm like, it's a playroom. Technically, it was the dining room, but we have two dining rooms. Like, so one became a playroom, one became a dining room, and I have my living room. Well, put the girls in there. I'm like, there's no door. And plus, there's a back door that leads outside. So because I refused to do that at first, they didn't like that idea. I'm like, well, if cameras are up in every single hallway, kitchen, living room, dining room, why do we have to rearrange the house to add another room that's not even a bedroom?
Yeah. And if they're like so concerned about them going outside, can't you just put like an alarm on that door? You know,
well,
like.
Yeah, we can, but technically speaking, it's not a bedroom. And I told them, they're like, well, just hang a curtain. There's no door. I'm like, I'm not going to live like a hillbilly because you want me to make a room that's not even a room.
And who is it for them to stay, you know? Like, it's so mind-blowing to me how they can just, like, tell you how to live in, you know. Oh, sorry. It just annoys the crap out of me that they can do that.
It is really annoying because I even told them, I'm like, well, since you wanted a bedroom, how about DCFS pays for the framework and puts a new door and let's create a bedroom, but on your cost. Oh, no, we can't do that.
Oh, of course not.
Like, but you want me to do it. Like, they're ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and 5 bedrooms, like, that's a good amount of rooms. You know, there's a lot of kids that don't even have bedrooms, you know, so just can't even believe them. They're just, it sounds like they're just trying to find anything.
You know, before the rooms were perfectly fine the way they were. Like, we even went out, we got new bedding, like bed sets. We painted the girls' room the way, the color that they chose. Like, everything decorated the way they want it. And then we moved rooms around as it is. And then, boom, we get hit with this. And I'm like, well, yeah, thanks a lot. Now my 2-year-old boy has to be stuck in a pink bedroom.
Oh no. Wow. There's something.
And, yeah. It's, and then the older girls is like, why is our room down here now? And so their dads told the caseworker, you explain that to them.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough as it is that they're not there, but then to have to come home and everything is upside down even more. Like, they just want to come home to their own rooms, you know? That's so difficult. I'm so sorry that you're going through all this. It's so frustrating. I can't stand
it's very
the way it is.
Like, I'm just worried with these 2 new allegations that something's going to turn really bad. To where we're not even going to get our kids, period. And, you know, throughout the whole course of the kids almost coming home, we have asked them numerous times because we felt something was going to happen. I'm like, go back to supervised. I'm like, have a supervisor there. So, you know, we're not doing nothing that we're not supposed to, or we're doing everything that you want, plus more. We're going above and beyond more than you even expected.
Yeah.
And, like, nothing is good enough.
No, they want you to fail. They will do anything to get you to fail. It's so difficult. I'm actually really surprised they don't have you drug test because they usually do that anyways, even if drugs isn't even an issue. So you got lucky there, because that's a whole other pain in the ass. Wow. So you only get to see them once a week for 2 hours?
Yeah.
Wow. That's not enough time.
No, it's not. It's like you get there, and then we can't leave this lady's eyesight. Like if some of the kids want to go outside and some don't, no one's allowed to go outside, or everyone would have to go outside, or everyone had to stay in. Like this is the same issue we had in the beginning when it was supervised. We did 10 months supervised. I'm like, for what? I'm like, why is it taking so long? Why are we doing so much supervised time?
Because they're trying to find some dirt on you. They're trying to find, waiting for any kind of a slip up or anything that they can turn around into something bad.
But they really can't, because I'm a straightforward person. I don't sugarcoat my words to them, and they know it. And
good for you.
They don't have nothing else. Like everything that they claimed is all bogus claims anyways.
Yeah. Yep, that's how they work. I'm surprised that they're still making you continue to do all this. Like, you've been doing it for quite a while. I would definitely talk to your attorney about, the situation with the girls and how they're being kind of coerced into, saying these things. Gosh, I'm really sorry that you're going through all this. Is there anything that you want to say, like if one day down the line your kids end up seeing this, is there any kind of shout out you want to give to them?
My kids know. I tell my kids all the time, fight for your rights.
Yes.
Like, don't ever let somebody push you around. Don't answer questions. Any authority figure, like especially DCFS, do not talk to them. Like, I tell my kids this, I drill this in their heads.
Yeah. Well, your kids are really lucky. You seem like a really great mom. Well, okay, I'm going to wrap it up here. Is there anything else you want to say before we end the show?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think we got it all out. I mean, it's a big story.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I would love to hear an update about what happens. I hope you get your kids back soon at your next hearing. But yeah, let us know. If anybody else wants to share their story, please reach out to us. My name is Sabrina. This is Fight CPS. And I hope you guys all have a great weekend and Memorial Day. Bye, Amanda. Thank you.
Bye. You have a good night.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.